And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Forecast flying weather for Monday morning. With the front coming in, we've got a big area of IFR from the Arctic coast here on down into the central interior, right down to the Alaska range, trailing back out into the southeastern Bering Sea, followed by a lot of VFR to the west. And some marginal VFR starts showing up later tonight over the Kenai Peninsula and up into the Talkeetnas. Otherwise, VFR, Copper River Basin, southeast coast, and Kodiak Island. And then for tomorrow, that edges eastward a little bit, begins to diminish somewhat, but still a solid area here from the eastern north slope, south-southeastward in the central interior, in across Fairbanks area over toward Big Delta, and then down into northeast Bristol Bay. Marginal VFR, south central Alaska into Prince William Sound and the Copper River Basin now, and then a break here to the west and the western north slope, and then some more marginal VFR along the coast of the Chukchi Sea, Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island down to Nunivak Island along the Yukon Delta coast. Good VFR out here to the west, Aleutians and much of the Bering Sea, holding VFR, eastern North Gulf coast there, Cape St. Elias, Yakutat on down across the entire panhandle. And then for Tuesday morning, IFR here across the northern interior from the Brooks Range southward to the Alaska Range in the central and eastern areas. More IFR here along the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound area, marginal VFR, Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, and the Manauskas-Susitna Valleys. Portions of the Kuskokwim Valley, VFR, marginal VFR there for the southwest part of the state, up across Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island. A zone of VFR here pushing up, as I mentioned, into the southern Kuskokwim Valley from Bristol Bay. Staying VFR here for the southeast coast, VFR up here for the Arctic coast, and still a lot of VFR out over the Bering Sea, Aleutians, and Alaska Peninsula, and that holds here for the peninsula through Tuesday afternoon. Kodiak Island, VFR. VFR now up the southwest coast to St. Lawrence Island and starting to show up over the Seward Peninsula. Then some marginal VFR gathering here over the western Aleutians and the west central Bering Sea. IFR along the Brooks Range southward into the Koyukuk Valley. VFR to the north there to the eastern Arctic coast, and some IFR along the Alaska Range. Otherwise, southern Alaska here mostly marginal, but VFR now sliding into southern Cook Inlet. IFR, northern Panhandle. And for passes, Anatuvik and Adigan, look IFR for the day on Monday for both passes on either approach. Lake Clark and Merrill, same forecast. In fact, the western Alaska Range looks IFR for rainy and even windy. Isabel, IFR as well. Then we'll go marginal for Mentasta. Tanita, marginal VFR. Portage looks marginal. And Chilkoot and White will stay VFR. And for the freezing levels, southwest flow here ahead of that front coming eastward. So tomorrow morning, 10,000 feet there over Bristol Bay. Otherwise, 2,000 feet right up into the west central interior areas, lower here to the east, about 2,000 feet still over the southern southeast coast. Then some cooler air coming back down behind the front there, 2,000 feet back into the western Bering Sea. Icing, look for some areas of considerable moderate rime icing along in advance of the front here as it pushes eastward into the interior and then extending back along the western Brooks Range area, roughly below about 15,000 feet or so. And looking at the jet stream, high pressure here shifting eastward, ridging right up over the northern southeast coast here and right across Yakutat, actually, the ridge axis there. So behind that, southwest flow, very strong here coming into the western interior, west-southwest flow, 165 knots, a little lighter here over the southeast Bering Sea than west-northwest, 100 to 110 knots back to the west there. And this northeast wind, stronger jet core now shifting south of the Panhandle, blowing right across the Queen Charlotte Islands. 9,000 feet, westerly flow across the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. Takes a turn to the northeast here at about 75 knots in over interior Alaska. Much lighter for the southeast coast. And at 3,000 feet, We've got westerlies at 70 knots here. This band actually extending up through the Bering Strait into the southern Chukchi Sea, and then up to 45 knots progressing into the central interior just north of the Alaska Range. Looking at westerlies at about 50 knots there, southwest of Kodiak Island. Southeast interior pretty light on down the southeast coast. And looking at turbulence, we've got possible severe turbulence, a chance of severe turbulence here, below surface 4,000 feet, St. Lawrence Island, western Seward Peninsula, up along the northwest coast there from, say, Red Dog Dock, Kivalina, on up toward Cape Lisburne, Point Hope. Considerable moderate, a big area here along the Brooks Range, extending down across the southwest, or mainly the Yukon Delta, in toward the Pribilof Islands. Light to isolated moderate turbulence for much of the Aleutians, and then some mechanical, considerable moderate here for the Kamishak Bay area and the Aleutian Range, also out over the western Aleutians. Otherwise, not too bad, nothing too significant for the southeast coast on up into the Copper River Basin and Prince William Sound.